Okay, we should be rolling. Welcome everybody to the third Philosophy Club meeting here at CSUS. My name is William Wyatt. I am your de facto president, although this is an unofficial club, so that doesn't mean anything. Today we are going to be having a presentation by Professor Brandon Carey on a topic related to epistemology. I don't know a great deal more than that. On screen you should be seeing the quick and dirty, as I'm told, abstract to that talk. But yeah, he's basically going to take it away and lead us somewhere interesting. I'm excited for this because it is the first time, as I've been in the club, that a properly professional philosopher is going to give us a presentation and share work in his field of expertise. So that's going to be really cool. If anybody would like to make a quick, introduction to the other members of the club, just so that we know each other's names and faces, now would be a good time to do that. If anybody would like to.
Hi everyone. I'm Daniel. I am the nominal unofficial club treasurer and also unofficial loudest person in the club. Once again, if anyone would like to challenge me to that title, please don't. I'm sure it will be very unpleasant to listen to with two people just trying to shout. But regardless, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Good to see you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Hi, I'm Camille. I am the outreach coordinator for this club, so I reach out to guest speakers. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Professor Carey, for coming and speaking at this meeting.
All right, Camille, thank you for making this happen. Anybody would like to volunteer?
I'm Rex. I'm the guy. If you have a class with me, you've probably never seen my face before through the screen. But yeah, I'm not any cool title like that. This is just my first time here.
Of course, the members are the club, so we're happy to have you. All right. If nobody else would like to make an introduction, that's perfectly fine. Do feel free to speak up. But yeah, if there are no further ones, we'll just proceed right into the presentation with Professor Carey. If you are ready, Professor.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Hi, folks. I'm very excited to be here. I love Philosophy Club. I'm glad to be back giving a talk to Philosophy Club. I love doing this kind of thing. Thank you very much to the officers, to William for kind of kicking things off and getting the club back up and running, and to Camille for inviting me to be here. Very excited, as I said, and to Daniel for doing shady things with the money, I imagine. I don't know. But yes, thank you. And thank all of you for being here. I think I know everybody to one degree or another, so that's great. I'm glad to see familiar faces. So I think it's probably not true that I'm a properly professional philosopher, but I will be presenting some of my actual work today. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, we'll kind of see. Let's see. It's telling me if I share my screen, it will force someone else to stop. Is that all right, William?
Right, let me unshare, I suppose would be the term. Pause share. No. Yeah, what if I just do that?
Ah, perfect.
There we go.
Okay. So I think you've all had a class with me, so you're probably used to fancy Prezi presentations. That's not happening today. I apologize. This presentation is not at that level yet. You're getting some early draft stuff here. So I just have a Word document that I will scroll through. It's reasonably organized. But basically, some of these things will look familiar, at least to folks who are taking or have taken 180. So I hope not to bore you, but I'm also going to try not to assume that anyone has taken knowledge and understanding or is currently taking knowledge and understanding. I'm just going to introduce the kind of basic problem that I'm trying to solve and a sort of default view that a lot of philosophers assume that I think is a bad view. So I'm going to give you some reasons to think that view is a bad view. And if all I do is succeed in convincing you that that view is bad, I'm going to call that a win. It's unlikely that I'm going to convince all of you of anything. Probably this is Philosophy Club, but that's going to be my first task. And then I have a suggestion for a better view. So that's sort of the agenda here. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to scroll through this while keeping all of you on my screen at the same time. There are few enough people here that I think it is totally reasonable. If you have a question as I'm talking, feel free to do the little hand raise thing in Zoom if you like, or just interrupt me. That's fine too. If something I say doesn't make sense, well, if something I say is so far from making sense that you can't even tell what I'm trying to say, then feel free to jump in. Or if you have questions, by all means. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm interested in knowledge. That's why I teach the knowledge and understanding class. And one of the things that I'm really interested in about knowledge is how good your evidence or your reasons have to be in order for them to be good enough for you to know something, right? Like you have good reasons to believe some things, better reasons to believe others. So there's like a continuum of the strength of your reasons or your evidence. And where do you have to fall on that continuum in order to have good enough reasons for knowledge? Or to put it in terms that we would usually put it in that knowledge and understanding class, to know something, you need justification. Your belief in some proposition needs to be justified in order for that belief to count as knowledge. It needs other things too, but it at least needs to be justified. It's also going to need to be true and some other things. But the key thing I'm worried about here is the justification. And when I say it needs to be justified, I basically just mean you need good reasons to believe that proposition. When I say proposition here, I just mean like some claim about the world. So like the earth is roughly spherical is a proposition, and the earth is flat is an incompatible proposition. And at most, one of those propositions is true, right? Only one of them could accurately describe the shape of the earth. But it could be that some people are justified in believing that the earth is roughly spherical, and other people are justified in believing it's flat. Now, it's also possible that people who believe the earth is flat are not justified in that belief. That's probably the more common situation, but you could be justified in that kind of belief. So in particular, if you imagine someone who had very little evidence, like no understanding of the solar system or what the earth is actually like, and they just kind of, like they live in Kansas or something, and they look at the horizon and they're like, yeah, it seems flat. I mean, that's a reason. And if you had no other reasons, that might be a good enough reason to justify your belief. Okay, now if you think about like my belief that the earth is roughly spherical, I have some slightly more complex reasons, like, I don't know, I read it in a science book. That's probably about the end of it. Other people have really good reasons though, right? Like astronauts who have looked at the earth from space, they have awesome reasons to think that the earth is more or less spherical. Okay, so all of that is just to talk about the strength of reasons. Beliefs can be justified. That doesn't guarantee that they're true. That's kind of groundwork stuff. So if reasons can be stronger or weaker, you might think, well, okay, how good does your reason have to be in order for you to be in a position to know something, to have knowledge level reasons, or as I'll usually talk about it in this talk, knowledge level evidence, evidence that would be good enough for you to know something, provided it's true and maybe some other stuff goes on. Okay, so there's a kind of story that a lot of people believe about how we should answer that question. And the story has to do with probability. When I talk about probability, I mean to talk about it in a pretty intuitive way, where the probability that P is true is just like the likelihood. It's the chance that P is true. If you were to like run the simulation 100 times, right, and the probability that P is 60%, you'd expect 60 of those times roughly for P to come out true and 40 of them roughly for P to come out false. I don't mean anything more complex than that by probability. There are lots of complex theories of probability, but I'm not qualified to talk about them. So that's all I mean, just like the chance that P is true. Okay, so this view about knowledge that, or this story, I guess I'll call it, about knowledge that a lot of people believe goes like this. So when you form your beliefs, what you have to go on, like what you have to do to decide, what you have to use to decide what to believe is your evidence. And your evidence consists of a bunch of propositions. I already think that's false, but that's not important. Imagine your evidence consists of a bunch of propositions. Like maybe it's the stuff you know, maybe that's your evidence, right? So I know the earth is roughly spherical. That's one of the things that's in my evidence. And I could use that as a reason to believe something else, like to believe that the earth is not flat, for example. So I have this evidence. It consists of a bunch of propositions. And then given the evidence I have, other propositions will be more or less likely to be true, right? So I have some set of evidence based on my experiences and what I know about the world. You have a different set of evidence. And so a proposition might be very likely given my evidence, but less likely given your evidence. And so different things will be justified for me than are justified for you. And that's all fine. So the key thing here is that given the evidence I have, for any proposition I think about, there will be some chance that that proposition is true, some probability or likelihood, which I'll usually express as like a percentage or a decimal between 0 and 1, I guess. And I'll call that the conditional probability. So there's like whether P is true, and that's one question. But the other question is, given the information I have, how likely is it that P is true? And a lot of people think that's what determines how good my justification is. Given the evidence I have, what are the odds that P is true? What's the percentage chance that P is true? If you've taken inductive logic, so philosophy 61, this idea should not be totally foreign to you. This idea of a conditional probability, right? Given the information I have, how likely is it that it's true? Okay, so this thing that I'm going to call probabilism says whether your justification is good enough for knowledge, whether your evidence is good enough for you to know a proposition, is just determined by how probable that proposition is on your evidence. Whatever the conditional probability is, so assuming your evidence is true, how likely the proposition is, that's what determines the strength of your justification. That's what determines whether your justification is good enough for knowledge. So there's like some level of probability, some like degree of probability or threshold. And if the conditional probability is at least that high, then your justification is good enough for knowledge. And if it's not at least that high, then your justification is not good enough for knowledge. And that's the end of the story. That's the whole thing about justification. For those of you who have taken or are taking 180, if you think back to when I talk about justification as being kind of on a spectrum, right? And there's like a 0.5 chance that P is true, and that's where you should suspend judgment because you just don't have any good reason either way. But if it's above 0.5, like between 0.5 and 1, you should think P is true. If it's below 0.5, you should think P is false. If it's 1, right, if it's like a guarantee that P is true given your evidence, that's the best scenario, right? That's when you can be absolutely certain that P. This is sort of built on that idea or closely related to that idea. Okay, so even though I teach that in the class, I think it's false. So I'm going to try to convince you today that this story, this probabilism idea, is just not right. That it can't just be a matter of conditional probability or how likely it is that P is true given your evidence. There's something else that matters to whether your justification is good enough for knowledge. Okay, so to illustrate that, I'm going to point out first two consequences of probabilism. So these are two things that, well, one of them follows just from probabilism, another follows from probabilism plus a very plausible assumption that is so plausible I'm not even going to explain it. But if you have a question about it or you want to doubt it, that's fine too. So the first is that if we have two different bodies of evidence, right, say your evidence and my evidence, and I'm just going to give those names, E1 and E2. So they're E's because they're bodies of evidence, and they're two different ones. So there's the first one and the second one, E1 and E2. If a proposition is equally probable on both bodies of evidence, then one of those bodies of evidence is good enough to know that proposition, just in case the other one also is. So like they're either both good enough for knowledge or they're both not good enough for knowledge. If the probability is the same and the probability is the only thing that matters, then any two bodies of evidence that are the same in terms of the probability of P will be the same in terms of whether the justification is good enough for knowledge, because the strength of the justification will be the same, and that's the only thing that matters according to probabilism. So that's the first consequence. To sort of highlight why this matters, because that's probably not at all obvious right now. What I'm going to do to try to convince you that probabilism is false, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to show you cases where we have two bodies of evidence that make a proposition equally likely. The conditional probability of the proposition is the same on these two bodies of evidence, but one of them seems good enough for knowledge and the other one doesn't. So if I can convince you there are cases like that, that means that A is false. Since A is a consequence of probabilism, that means probabilism is false. The second consequence is that if the probability of a proposition on a body of evidence is 1, So this is that situation I was talking about that's really, really good when your evidence absolutely guarantees that a proposition is true. Then that's just got to be good enough for knowledge, because you can't get any better than that. There's no probability higher than 1, right? The spectrum goes from 0 to 1. 1 is a 100% chance that P is true, assuming that E is true. So there's no higher level. And whatever the highest level is, that has to be good enough for knowledge. That's the assumption, by the way, that I'm not going to defend. Whatever the maximum probability is, that has to be good enough for knowledge on any serious version of probabilism. Okay, and so the reason I point out that consequence is that I'm going to show you a case where the conditional probability of a proposition is 1, and yet it doesn't seem like your justification is good enough for knowledge. Okay, so here's my thesis. Probabilism is false. That's it. This, incidentally, if you're writing analysis papers, this is the kind of thesis I'm looking for. Nice and simple, right? Here's a view, it's false. Okay, so the tricky part is defending the thesis, right? I got to give you reasons. I can't just say probabilism is false and then you all cheer, right? I need to do more than that. So I'm going to give you some cases that seem to show that either A or B is false. And since probabilism entails A and B, if they're false, probabilism is also false. So the first one is a very well-known problem in epistemology, but it's a very boring problem, so we don't talk about it a lot. Also, it's a problem for this view that everybody likes. That's another reason people don't talk about it. But it is a very old, well-known problem, and it's called the problem of logical omniscience. And it goes like this. This will make more sense if you've taken Philosophy 60, but I can explain it with a different example if you haven't. So for those of you who have taken Philosophy 60, that's the deductive logic class, you will have learned 2 languages, and one of them is propositional logic. Sometimes we call it sentential logic. That's the one with the P's and the Q's and the wedges and the carets and all that stuff. Okay, so that's a logical language, and it has axioms. It has sort of foundational principles from which you derive all of the other things that are true in the logic. And the axioms are really boring. They're like, you know, P or not P. They're so dull. But from fairly simple axioms, you can derive all kinds of more interesting things. Okay, so let's suppose that you are certain of the axioms of propositional logic. Which is not totally crazy because they're very simple things like P or not P, which, by the way, I think is false, but it would not be totally nuts for you to be certain of these axioms. Well, here's a fact about propositional logic. The axioms of propositional logic entail all of the theorems of propositional logic. What I mean by that is that if the axioms are true, the theorems absolutely have to be true. It's impossible for the theorems to be false if the axioms are true. What that means in terms of conditional probability is that the conditional probability of any theorem of propositional logic on the axioms of propositional logic is 1. It's an absolute guarantee. It's like a valid argument, right? And a valid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion absolutely has to be true. The conditional probability of the conclusion on the premises of a valid argument is 1. And the same is true for every theorem of propositional logic on the axioms of propositional logic. So probabilism says that your justification is just a matter of how probable the proposition is on your evidence. Your evidence in this case is the axioms. The conditional probability of the theorem, whatever it is 1. So you're already justified, and not just like a little bit justified. You are as justified as you could possibly be in believing every theorem of propositional logic. But here's the thing. You do not have knowledge level evidence for all of the theorems of propositional logic. Most of the theorems, I can't even say most, there are infinitely many theorems of propositional logic. And you have never considered, you have never considered infinitely many theorems of propositional logic. You've never thought about them even a little bit. Some of them are so long that you couldn't think them, like you wouldn't have time to think this one theorem before you die. That's how long they are. So you don't have knowledge level evidence for those things. You don't have any reason to believe them at all. But probabilism says you have the best kind of reason you could possibly have, because your evidence entails, that is, it guarantees that those theorems are true. So I'm appealing here to this consequence of probabilism B, right? If the conditional probability is 1, that's knowledge level evidence. I say, here's a case where the conditional probability is 1, but it's not knowledge level evidence. It's no evidence at all. It's not even like a kind of good reason. So, I mean, suppose, I didn't bring one, I should have. Imagine that I flash on the screen before you some just like impossibly complex sequence of P's and Q's and R's and parentheses and arrows and all kinds of nonsense, right? Probabilism would say, as long as you know the axioms of propositional logic, you are in a position to know that that theorem is true. I think that's nuts. Okay, so that's my first objection to probabilism. It says, you know all this stuff that you couldn't possibly know. Or not even that you know it, but that you have good enough justification to know it. And that's just not true. But I can make that problem worse. Really, reason 2 is just like reason 1 plus. It's like reason 1a, here's how I can make reason 1 even more terrible for probabilism. So let's suppose, this will be familiar, you've probably done this a lot if you've taken Philosophy 60. You start with a formula and you want to know whether it's a theorem, right? So maybe you're doing like truth trees, or maybe you're doing natural deduction where you're like doing line by line proofs, whatever system you're using, you have a formula and you want to know whether it's a theorem or not. At the beginning, so like suppose this is a test question, right? At the beginning, just looking at this complicated formula, you have absolutely no idea whether it's a theorem or not, right? You're going to figure that out as you work through the problem, but you just haven't done it yet. You have no reason either way to think that it's a theorem or that it isn't. Let's suppose your professor is just as likely to put a theorem as a contradiction on this kind of question. You just have no reason to think either way. But then it takes you a really long time. It's a really hard problem. And you finally complete a proof of the formula, right? You start with the axioms of propositional logic and you derive this formula from them. You now have a proof that this is a theorem of propositional logic. Now you have a really good reason to think that the formula is a theorem. But before, you had no reason at all. Here's the bad part for probabilism. The conditional probability of the theorem on your evidence, where again, your evidence is just the axioms of the logical system, the conditional probability was 1 the whole time. Before you started the proof, the conditional probability was 1. After you finished the proof, the conditional probability was 1. So according to probabilism, your reasons were just as good before you started trying to figure this out, before you did any of the work, as they were at the end when you finished the proof. But that's just completely crazy. Your reasons are way better after you have the proof, because you have the proof as a reason for thinking that the theorem is true, or that the formula is a theorem. Well, and that it's true, because all the theorems are true, right? So probabilism says, hey, at the beginning, before you do any of the work, you have knowledge level evidence. After the proof, you still have exactly the same level of evidence that you had before. But that's just wrong. You had no evidence at all to begin with, and then you had really great evidence at the end. So that's the same problem really, but it just sort of highlights what is so wrong about the thought that you had knowledge level evidence at the outset before you did any of the work. Okay, so a lot of that was talking about Philosophy 60, which, I mean, even the advanced philosophy majors among you, you don't have to take Philosophy 60 necessarily, so maybe that didn't make any sense. So I can talk about math instead. Most people like math even less than they like logic, but a lot of people are familiar with this idea that mathematicians prove things, and that there are long spans of time where mathematicians are trying to prove some conjecture, right? Like they have something they think is true, and some people spend their whole careers trying to prove that a thing is true. And sometimes they succeed. Sometimes there's something that for like 3 centuries, no one has been able to prove, and then some super genius grad student does it, right? Well, here's the thing. When they prove those things in math, those things were already guaranteed to be true by the axioms of the system they were working in. That's what a proof is. You take the axioms of the system and you use them to demonstrate that something is true. So just like in the logic case, probabilism says, well, anybody who knew the axioms of piano arithmetic, which, all right, is just a bunch of math nerds, but still, it's like a lot of people. Probabilism says all of those people had knowledge level evidence for, you know, whatever fancy conjecture was proved yesterday. Everybody had knowledge level evidence for that for centuries. But that's just not how it was, right? People didn't know for sure whether it was true until someone completed the proof. Okay. That, I promise, those are the most boring reasons that probabilism is false. It's about to pick up at least a little bit. And this should look very familiar to people who, oops, I don't know what I just did there, to people who have taken or are taking 180. At least you've taken 180 recently. This is sort of new to the class. It's at least a new example, I think. It's not the one I normally use in my lectures. So this is what's called the profiling paradox. And it's a pretty new paradox. It is a 21st century paradox. This is not something that philosophers knew about. Maybe that's not the right way to say it, but this is not something philosophers talked about until the last decade or so, really, maybe half decade. And it goes like this. Here are two cases. These are two different cases of professors, or sorry, teachers, I guess. I think this is like a high school case. Teachers grading a student's work. So in grading case A, Carmen is a new student who lives in Carmichael. And looking at the grades in the English classes from the last several years, Carmen's English teacher has noticed that 99% of students from Carmichael earn a C. So he thinks, well, Carmen's from Carmichael, 99% of those students get a C. So there's a 99% chance that Carmen will earn a C. And I don't know if anyone has ever told you this, but grading is really difficult and time consuming. So to avoid that whole process, Carmen's English teacher just says, well, Carmen's probably going to get a C. So he just puts a C in the grade book, doesn't look at any of her written work, doesn't pay attention to her participation in class. He probably forgets her name as soon as he puts the C in the grade book, right? Pays no attention to her work, but has this pretty good looking inductive argument, right? In lots of other circumstances, if I said like, well, 99% of the ravens that I've seen have been black, probably the next one will be black. That's a pretty good argument. I mean, it's not a guarantee, right? It's just very, very likely that the next raven's going to be black. Same deal here. Okay, grading case B. Carmen's physics teacher is a much more responsible teacher, deserving of, I don't know, awards or something. Carmen's physics teacher does it the way you're supposed to do it. Carmen's physics teacher doesn't use statistics about past students from Carmichael. She just looks at Carmen's work and grades it according to the standards in the syllabus, right? And determines that Carmen has earned a C. But of course, teachers make mistakes. Carmen's physics teacher knows, sometimes I get it wrong. I try my best, but about 1% of the time I make a mistake and I assign a student the wrong grade. So even though I've done my due diligence, I did the appropriate grading and all of that, there's still only a 99% chance that Carmen has earned a C, but still that's the best I can do, right? I'm a fallible being. I can't have a 100% chance that I'm getting it right. So I'm going to give Carmen a C based on this reasoning that there's a 99% chance that she's earned a C. Okay, so now I have a question. This is going to require participation from at least one person because I'm not going to answer this question. And really it's two questions, right? So in case A, does Carmen's English teacher have good enough evidence to know that Carmen has earned a C? What do we think? Is this knowledge level evidence that Carmen's English teacher has here? Rex gives the red X. I like that very much.
I'm gonna give case A a big old fat nope.
A big nope. Let's see if I can put a big fat nope in my Word document here. Oh, come on, work with me, Zoom. Okay, there's my big fat nope for Daniel. And it looks like Rex agrees. Does anyone want to strongly disagree and say that, yeah, that's good teachering. That's how you do it. That's how you come to know that a student has earned a C. No takers. I'm willing to invite controversy, but I don't know what your argument's going to be. Okay. Okay. So how about
why? But
okay. William?
No. I assume, I think it's going to come up actually that we're going to talk about why that's incorrect.
Okay. Good. Okay. So how about grading case B? How many think in grading case B that Carmen's physics teacher? Does anybody think that Carmen's physics teacher has knowledge level evidence that Carmen has earned a C?
I'm not sure. It's cut off. I'd like to reread that again.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Maybe I can zoom in on just case B. Oops, that's my trash. That's not going to help you at all. Is that better? Can you see it all now, Rex?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, let's try this. Does anyone want to make the case that Carmen's physics teacher either does or does not have knowledge level evidence here?
I'm gonna make the bold and controversial stance that that this is a big old yep for knowledge.
Big ol' yep.
A big old yep. She done looked at the work. Is knowledgeable about physics and requirements for what it takes to earn a C in their physics class, and is aware that you're not fallible, but I don't know. I don't think we need to be totally completely infallible about everything in order to be knowledge. Because I mean, it's totally possible we might all be dreaming right now, but like Rene Descartes can just like go away.
Well, he's dead. He already went away. So yeah, there you go. All right, Rex.
So I would say yeah, but I think this is sort of a weird example because with grading, there's no really objective right or wrong. There's sort of a subjective standard, and based on his C standard, that's what he gives, and there's really no way for him to be wrong if he's doing his work. That yes, I gave the guy a C. So
Well, I have to say that I really like that attitude, and I hope all of my students think that I can't be wrong about their grades. But I do think that it would be possible for a teacher to be wrong in this kind of situation. I think that people can assign the wrong grade, at least in this sense, and I think maybe you'll still grant me this, Rex, that the physics teacher could accidentally assign her a grade that doesn't fit her own standards, right? Like, even if we think that every teacher has different standards and whatever standards they use are fine, it could be that the kind of mistake we're talking about here is that the physics teacher just like writes another student's grade in the box for Carmen's grade or something like that. And that seems like it would still count as a mistake. So there is that possibility of being wrong. But even then, assuming the physics teacher is right about her track record here, it's going to be a very unlikely chance of being wrong. So unless, to get back to Daniel's point, unless we're going to be infallibilists and think that you can't have knowledge unless you have a guarantee from your evidence that the proposition is true, then maybe 99% isn't high enough, but that's a made up number, right? I can make this 99.99999 and so on. I can make it real close to 100% if we like. And so as long as we're allowing a little bit of wiggle room, some possibility of error, it seems like we'll be able to get a case that plausibly is a case where we have good enough reasons for knowledge. But again, I can make the number as close to 100 as you want, as long as we don't get to 100 in grading case A. So the intuition that I'm trying to solicit here, because again, I'm trying to convince you of a thing, is that the evidence in grading case B is just better than the evidence in grading case A, or at least it's more like the kind of evidence that you could use to know something, at least to know this kind of thing, than the evidence in grading case A. But according to probabilism, the evidence in these two cases is equally good because the probability that the proposition is true is the same in both cases. So probabilism says, well, one kind of evidence is just as good as another kind of evidence. The statistical evidence from other students is exactly as good as the evidence from looking at Carmen's actual work. And that to me just seems absolutely bananas. Like, there is no way that you can think that these two bodies of evidence are equally good, equally knowledge-worthy bodies of evidence. Well, I shouldn't say there's no way, because lots of people think that, apparently. Or they think a thing that commits them to that, and they haven't thought about this case. I think that's more likely. Okay, so that's reason 3. I have a 4th reason. There's a famous quote from somebody who's dead, that if you don't have a good reason, you should have lots of reasons. I actually don't think that's a very good approach, but I do have lots of reasons. I just think all of them are good reasons. There are more reasons than the ones I have here, but I don't want to talk forever. So this will be my last reason for thinking probabilism is false. This again will look familiar to folks with 180 experience. This is the proof paradox. This is a puzzle from legal epistemology. And we usually use this to challenge standards of evidence. So if you think about when we decide something in a court of law, there's some standard that we use to determine whether we have the right kind of evidence to, say, convict someone of a crime. If we want to convict someone of a crime, we use a very high standard. We use the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. But even that standard is not an absolute guarantee, right? Sometimes we meet that standard and it still turns out that we're wrong. Sometimes even without corruption or malfeasance, innocent people end up being convicted of crimes. Of course, a lot more people end up being convicted because of corruption and malfeasance, but that's its own problem for an ethics class or something. But one kind of challenge that people have raised for a lower evidentiary standard, what we call the preponderance of the evidence standard, is this proof paradox. I'm going to use the example from the proof paradox, but I'm going to use it to talk about knowledge instead, because I'm a big knowledge nerd. And because probabilism is a view about knowledge, and that's what I'm attacking here. So here's the case. or the pair of cases, I should say. So there's gate crasher case A. Gate crashing, by the way, is when you go to an event without paying for it. I think people don't call that gate crashing anymore, but that's what that word means. So like if you go to a concert and you like sneak under the rope instead of paying, or if you go to the movie theater by just sneaking in the back door when other people are exiting the theater or whatever, that's gate crashing. It's just going without paying. So in this case, it's a carnival because carnivals are fun. And the manager of the carnival knows that 100 people attended the carnival today, but only 15 of those people actually paid the admission fee, right? So suppose admission's $1. We only collected $15, but I just counted all the people who were here and there are 100 of them. So 100 people attended, only 15 paid, which means 85 people were gate crashers. Okay, well, there are 100 total people, 85 of them are gate crashers. If we select someone at random, there's an 85% chance that that person is a gate crasher, right? 85 people out of 100 are gate crashers. Assuming we could actually select randomly, we would have an 85% chance of selecting a gate crasher. So the manager randomly selects Pam. Maybe he assigns a number to everyone and then uses his computer to select a random number. I don't want to talk about true randomness, so please don't bring it up. So the manager randomly selects Pam and sues her for the admission fee of $1 in small claims court. Okay, so that's a case that is sometimes used to challenge a particular standard of evidence. But my question is going to be, does the manager have good enough evidence in this case to know that Pam is a gate crasher? How many think yes? Yeses. How many think no? I see Rex thinks no. All right, let me give you gate crasher B, and we'll cycle back or circle back or something back and see how we feel about this. Okay, so gate crasher B. It's a different kind of case. The manager doesn't know how many people are there today, doesn't know how much money was taken in, so doesn't have any of the statistical evidence from the first case. But a reliable employee says that they saw Pam sneak in through the side gate. Classic gate crashing behavior. Right, so the manager, let's suppose, knows that eyewitness reports from reliable sources are about 85% likely to be true. That number is probably high, but it's a made up example. In this alternate possible world, eyewitness reports are about 85% reliable. So the manager sues Pam for the admission fee in small claims court. How many think in gate crasher B, the manager has knowledge level evidence? So supposing Pam really is a gate crasher, how many think that this reliable employee's testimony is good enough evidence for the manager to know that? Got at least one thumbs up from Daniel. So I'm going to put a big yep. I assume that's what you want me to do, right, Daniel? Big yep.
Just the biggest yep possible.
Okay. Any other thoughts about gate crasher B? Let's try this. Is there anyone that I cannot sell on this fairly weak idea? The manager has better evidence in gate crasher B than in gate crasher A. The manager has like a better case in small claims court based on the employee's testimony than based on selecting someone at random. Anyone think that's not true? Okay, good. I'm taking your silence as agreement. That's how I like to do things in my classes as well, especially the asynchronous online ones where everyone is always silent. So similar structure to the profiling paradox. I'm just trying to say, hey, look, the reasons over here on the right are better reasons. Maybe you still think that the 85% or that testimony is not good enough for knowledge. And we could talk about that. But basically, if one of these is good enough for knowledge, it's this one. They're not like equally good with respect to whether you could know on the basis of this kind of evidence. But probabilism says, hey, the conditional probability is the same, right? You got an 85% chance of being right either way. So they're either both good enough for knowledge or neither one is good enough for knowledge because they're equally good evidence, equally good justification. And that just doesn't square with my intuitions. That just seems like it couldn't possibly be true. Okay, so that's reason 4 for thinking that probabilism is false. Now oh man, this is so rude, but I'm moving tomorrow and the moving company is calling me right now. So I am going to disappear for just a minute and please talk amongst yourselves. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. We will host some discussion. I have some discussing to happen.
I can do karaoke if we need.
God, we should discuss. There it is. While that's happening, the thing I think we're going to come into with this is not just that. Well, okay, I have two things basically, 2 points to raise. The first is that this, as covered in Phil 180, for the benefit of those who have not taken it, the problem in both of the cases that we've looked at so far, the gatecrasher and the previous one, or both of the contrasts we've looked at so far, is that in one hypothetical case, the evidence is to do with statistics of a higher order, whereas in the other hypothetical case, the probability is determined based on evidence that is derived from the situation. So gatecrasher B meets the condition called sensitivity, where you would expect the probabilistic analysis to change with the available evidence, whereas in gatecrasher A, the statistics remain the same regardless of whether Pam did a gate crash. So we say that in gatecrasher A it's not good enough for knowledge, doesn't meet our intuitions, because in gatecrasher A, if Pam were not a gatecrasher, you would have the exact same evidence to say that she was. Whereas in gatecrasher B, that if Pam were not a gatecrasher, she probably, we would estimate, wouldn't have been seen and reported by an eyewitness, right? So there's that sensitivity consideration, and that's sometimes appended to analyses of knowledge to try and sort of resolve these cases. It has its own issues and counterexamples. The other thing that I want to raise, just while we're still well, I still have the spotlight, I guess I'll forfeit it in a moment, is that cases like this are still plausible, and it drives home the point that epistemology, although it can seem very abstract and academic, does matter, and it can matter substantially in real world cases, where you might have statistics that are not sensitive to the case at hand. Police profiling has sometimes fallen into this realm of conclusions drawn from statistical evidence that is not sensitive to the people being stopped and frisked and so forth. So yeah, sorry about that.
No,
Folks, I'm back.
I mean,
I'm sorry.
You're
Go
on
ahead.
top of something, William. Like, especially that police profiling situation. I think that shows why this is, particularly relevant. So good job.
Okay. If there's any just before we resume presentation, does anybody else have any points to raise here in right before I think we get to the affirmative view? Okay. Cool. In that case, Professor Carey, please take it away.
Thanks, William. I'll say I just caught the tail end of that, but William is right. Also, for those of you, this is probably 0 of you who are interested in the update. Apparently, I'm not moving tomorrow, so there's all kinds of chaos and disarray. Anyway, but yes, William is right. I'm just about to get to the affirmative view. As soon as I ask a very difficult question, this is the question that my view is going to try to answer. So if probabilism is false, like what's the alternative, right? Like if we can't figure out how good your justification is, whether it's good enough for knowledge by thinking about these conditional probabilities in the way that we would in like Philosophy 61, in the way that I'm sure Professor Mays would love to answer all questions in terms of Bayesian conditionalization. If we can't use that to figure out whether you know something, then like what can we use? What kind of evidence do you need? What does your evidence need to be like in order for it to be good enough for knowledge? People have offered answers to this question. So like people working on the proof paradox have made something like the following suggestion. Your evidence needs to be individualized rather than statistical. The evidence has to be about this particular case, about this person, this event, this crime, or this tort, or whatever. I don't know, this some civil thing, this harm that you've inflicted on someone else. It needs to be individual and it can't be just statistical. And maybe that's right, but I don't think that being individual is like the interesting thing, or I don't think that's the thing that makes the difference. I think that individualized evidence has some more general characteristic that this statistical kind of evidence lacks. And maybe not all statistical evidence lacks it, but the statistical evidence in these cases does lack it. And I would like to figure out what that thing is. So here's my proposed answer to this hard question. It's there's like a technical formulation of it that is even more boring than this one. So this is the attempt to make it not super technical, but it's a little bit technical, so I apologize. So it looks like this. I call it KEC for reasons that don't matter. It says S knows that P only if, so I'm giving a necessary condition here. I'm saying this is something you have to have for knowledge. It's not enough for knowledge on its own, but it's one of the pieces you need in order to know something. And the piece you need is that S has good reasons to think that S would have different evidence if P were false. You have to have a good reason to think that you would have evidence that is at least somewhat different from the evidence that you actually do if the proposition were false, in order for your evidence to be knowledge level. Those of you who are either fresh off a midterm about sensitivity and safety conditions, or can cast your minds back to learning about sensitivity and safety, may recognize the sort of phrasing here as a counterfactual, right? I'm saying you have to have good reasons to think that if P were false, then you would have different evidence. The nearest worlds where P is false, you have different evidence. That's what you have to have good reason to believe. If that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. Even if I taught you about it before and you've completely forgotten and that's why it doesn't make sense to you, still don't worry about it. The key thing is just this normal English phrase, right? You would have different evidence if the proposition were false. There would be like some indication that you don't have if the proposition were false. Here's why I think this proposal is good. It gets the right answers in all the cases we just talked about. That's its only virtue. It's not simple, it's not intuitive, it's not like pretty. The only thing that's good about it is that it gets the right answers. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the only thing that matters. Well, it's not the only thing that matters, but it's like the top thing is getting the right answers in all the cases. So I'm gonna just quickly walk through why I think it gets the right answers in each of these cases or pairs of cases. And you might disagree with me, but here's why I think it gets these right. So in gatecrasher case A, where the manager is just saying, there's 85 gatecrashers here out of 100 people, I pick someone at random, 85% chance. Well, the manager then has no reason to think that they'd have different evidence if Pam were one of the 15 people who paid, right? We're just selecting at random based on the fact that there are 85 gatecrashers and 100 total people. If you picked someone at random and that person actually had paid, you would have no different evidence. You would have, there would be no change in your statistical evidence, right? Because the total numbers of people would be exactly the same. So the manager just has no reason to think that they would have different evidence if Pam were a paying customer, if Pam were a non-gate crasher, right? That's if P were false, right? So the manager doesn't satisfy my condition. And so the manager in case A doesn't have knowledge level evidence, according to KEC, according to me. So that seems right to me. Seems like the manager doesn't have knowledge level evidence, and that's what the view says. So that's one thumb up for the view so far. Gatecrasher case B, the manager does have reason to think that they would have different evidence if Pam had not gate crashed, because this is like a reliable employee, right? So if Pam hadn't gate crashed, the employee wouldn't have said that she did. Now, that's not like an absolute guarantee. Of course, it's possible for even a reliable person to make a mistake, or maybe this employee, unbeknownst to the manager, hates Pam in particular and is trying to set her up or something like that. But thinking about nearby worlds, right, where Pam is a paying customer, there probably aren't any nearby worlds where Pam is a paying customer and this reliable employee tells us that Pam gate crashed. So in this case, the manager does satisfy my condition, and that doesn't guarantee that the manager knows, or even that the evidence is good enough for knowledge, right? This might be one of like 12 evidentiary conditions that you have to satisfy in order to know, but at least the manager, in this case, where the evidence does seem knowledge level, satisfies my condition. That also seems good. So as far as the gatecrasher cases are concerned, my view says the evidence in gatecrasher B at least might be good enough. The evidence in gatecrasher A is definitely not good enough. And those seem like acceptable results, at least. In the profiling case, the English teacher, using just statistical evidence about students from Carmichael, has no reason to think that he'd have different statistical evidence if Carmen had earned an A, right? If Carmen had earned something other than a C is really all we're thinking about here. That's P is false. And there's just no reason to think that that would somehow change his statistical evidence about all the past students from Carmichael, right? That evidence would be the same either way. To, I think, steal a term that William used earlier, this is evidence that's not sensitive to whether Carmen has earned a C. It doesn't change whether she earned a C or not. On the other hand, the physics teacher does have good reasons to think that she would have different evidence if Carmen had earned an A, right? Because the grade book would show that like Carmen got an A on the midterm and Carmen got an A on the final and Carmen got an A on the analysis papers or whatever it is people do in physics classes, right? So there would be different evidence if Carmen had not earned a C. Again, that's not an absolute guarantee, right? It's like possible that the physics teacher just has this misleading evidence about Carmen or something like that. But you would expect to have different evidence if Carmen had earned an A instead of a C in the physics teacher case, but you wouldn't expect that in the English teacher case. So again, my view says the English teacher's evidence isn't good enough. The physics teacher's evidence at least might be good enough. Maybe there are other conditions that need to be satisfied, but at least this one is. Again, that seems like, or those seem like the right results. Those are the right answers instead of the bad answers that probabilism gave us. Okay, going back to the logical omniscience problem, before you do the proof, when you're just looking at the formula, you have no reason to think that you'd have different evidence if the formula was not a theorem, right? You're just like looking at a formula and you don't really have any good evidence either way about whether it's a formula or not. No reason to think it would be different if it was not a theorem. But after you do your proof, you do have a good reason to think you'd have different evidence if it was not a theorem. You wouldn't have your cool proof that you just did if it weren't a theorem, right? You would have like tried to prove it and failed. Or even better, you would have tried to prove that it's a contradiction and you would have succeeded in doing that. So in this case, it's not that we have two pairs of cases, right? Like we have one case and before you do the work, you wouldn't expect to have different evidence if the proposition were false. But then after you do the work, you would expect to have different evidence because you wouldn't have at least an apparently sound proof. I should put this in parentheses. That looks better. There we go. You wouldn't have this apparently sound proof of the formula if it weren't a theorem. At least you have good reasons to think that, right? Again, it's not an absolute guarantee. Sometimes people think that they have proved something and they're just wrong, right? I think there's a story about Hobbes squaring the circle that he like thought he had done it. Maybe it's not Hobbes. I don't know. It's some dead guy. Anyway. So yeah, my view gets the right answers, or at least it's compatible with the right answers in these cases, and probabilism gets the wrong answers. So I think my view is better. That's the whole argument, and that's the whole talk. I'm happy to answer some questions. I will have to leave before too long because I have to put pizza in myself, but I'll be happy to take questions or facilitate discussion or whatever you like for at least a little while here.
Thank you.
I see clapping. Thank you.
Yeah. As a substitute for the clapping, let me just say that was everything I wanted it to be.
Oh, great. I'm glad I made at least one person happy.
Yeah.
Well, two people, because I'm also happy. So there we go.
I was the clapping. You presumably made me happy too.
I didn't know if it was happy clapping or, you know, enraged clapping.
I guess I could have been clapping that it was, that's true. I could have been clapping that it was over. I wasn't. To now clarify, I wasn't, but fair enough. Since I've done and interrupted William like a jerk, I'm going to keep talking for a bit and ask a question. You have convinced me, but I have one sort of point to raise about KEC that is, you know, at least worthy of discussion.
Sure.
It like you said, its only virtue is that it gets the right answers, or it gets the answers sort of that we want. Isn't that just sophistry though? Isn't that just sort of like working backwards? Like I want this particular outcome, so I'm gonna concoct something that is going to get this particular outcome rather than something more purely philosophical?
Okay, good. Maybe. So I can't rule that out, I guess, but I'll say two things in my defense. So one is, I'm not in the business of convincing you just because I like convincing people, although that's sort of how I pitched it. Instead, I think that the sort of methodological approach I'm taking here is what we sometimes call particularism. If you've encountered anywhere, you wouldn't in my epistemology class because time is finite, but if you've encountered anywhere the problem of the criterion, or it's sometimes called the wheel or the dialelis, there's this idea that you can start thinking about knowledge in two different ways. One is you can start with a principle that looks good, like a theory of knowledge that says what counts as knowledge and what doesn't. And maybe that's like something that you grasp a priori, and then you apply it to cases, right? And there's another approach you can take, which is that you can start with a bunch of stuff you know and a bunch of stuff you don't know, like two big lists. These are things I know, these are things I don't know. And then you try to craft a theory of knowledge that counts all the things you know as cases of knowledge and counts all the things you don't know as not cases of knowledge, right? That's the kind of approach that I'm employing here. I'm saying, let's start with this data, right? Like these are cases where we have evidence that's good enough for knowledge, and these are cases where we don't. And now how do we draw a line that gets all of the cases that are cases where the evidence is good enough and counts those as cases of knowledge level evidence, and then excludes all of the other cases? We often employ this approach when we're kind of testing a conceptual analysis, right? When we look for counterexamples, we're looking for cases where you didn't draw the line right, where you included too many things or you included too few things. So that's just a kind of point about the methodology that I'm using. I'm not just trying to get a theory that sounds good, basically. I'm trying to get a theory that fits the data, is how I would characterize it. The other thing that I can say is that I do think there's something a little bit intuitive about this view, although I did not talk about it in the talk I just gave. And it's something like this. I think that when you present people with like a challenge to their evidence, they might appeal to this kind of counterfactual reasoning. So if I said, hey, I'm not on the moon, and you said, how do you know you're not on the moon? I might say something like, well, if I were on the moon, I'd have pretty different evidence. For example, I'd have evidence of like having a really hard time breathing, and having a much greater gravitational pull pulling me toward the surface that I'm on. And also things would look pretty different if I were on the moon, right? Like things would be grayer and blacker, I guess, in the sky. But I don't have any of that evidence. I have this evidence, right? So I have like pretty good reasons to think that my evidence would be radically different if I were on the moon. And that's how I know I'm not on the moon. And that kind of reasoning, although I didn't do it in like a very formal or precise way, that is captured a little bit in the idea, in the sort of consequent of KEC here, right? What I'm saying is, well, I'd have different evidence if that hypothesis were true. I'd have different evidence if I were on the moon. And since I don't have that evidence, that's how I know I'm not on the moon. That kind of reasoning does seem pretty intuitive to me as like reasoning about how you know something. And KEC does match up with that kind of reasoning. But that's the only way in which it is kind of intuitive or nice. Other than that, it's just, yeah, it fits the data. And that's the only good thing I can say about it.
And that makes complete and total sense. And just sort of cards on the table, it does not bother me if something is sophistry. I don't know. I deal with determinism through entirely like just sophistry and just BS means of just like, I want this thing to go away because I don't like it very much. So it would not have bothered me at all if you had just been like, I mean, probably, but who cares? That'd have been A-okay with me. But your explanation that wasn't that and was what, better is also good too.
All right, good. Well, I'll take that as a third defense, though, by the way. If you're willing to accept that, I'll take that one too.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. Do we have any more questions for Dr. Carey, given that we are at 8:01, according to my watch. So officially, like, we don't have to be here anymore, but I do want to keep time for discussion if we have anything else to discuss, and particularly questions for Dr. Carey before he's got to go. Anything like that in the chat. Okay, brilliant. In which case, of course, I'm gonna release Professor Brandon Carey. If you, by all means, sir, have your pizza. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks very much, William. Thanks to all of you for being here. Oh, hey, Miguel, good to see you. Thanks everybody. It was very nice to see some faces. I love talking philosophy, and I'm so glad that the club is doing stuff. And if I can assist you in any way, please let me know. I had a great time. I love talking. So again, thank you, and have a good rest of your evening and a good weekend. Better than mine, probably. Thanks again, folks, and I will see you in the future. Bye bye.
Of course. Best of
Hi,
luck.
Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Take care. Thank you.
I was not expecting the thing to go that long, but I'm kind of glad it did. We got a fully fleshed out case made for a necessary condition to knowledge. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to raise in discussion is that, you know, while we talk about like that case was obviously an affirmative one for a necessary condition. Oh, Miguel's gone too. Bye, Miguel. Yeah. That doesn't constitute, and it wasn't meant to constitute, a complete analysis of knowledge, a complete theory of a thing. It's just, when we talk about we say a necessary condition, all we really mean by that is that this thing has to be present, not that its presence necessitates that knowledge is also present. So yeah, necessary, not sufficient. It was the defense there, and I think it worked well for that, for sure. Yeah. I always have qualms slightly with epistemological discussions, and particularly particularism, because it's mostly appealing to what we intuitively want to say is knowledge, right? Alternatively, we could just accept a definition of knowledge and know that it's more meaningful in some cases than in others, but that, you know, that it is definite in the way we have a universal, you know, equation whereby we for determining how much gravity is exerted on an object by another object. We could have a universal definition of knowledge, and that would just be static, fixed, and accepted, whatever its implications might be. Whereas with particularism, we seem to be sort of arbitrarily saying that some things are knowledge, and some analyses are correct about knowledge, and some are closer to correct than others. But we're only measuring against our intuitions, and that seems sort of arbitrary. Nevertheless, it is, you know, compelling. This is sort of this is kind of the only way we've investigated knowledge so far. So I'm not really equipped to present an alternative, but it has consistently bugged me, like particularism as a methodological a methodology, I should say. Anyway. Any more points to raise about discussion? Maybe like a real world application of the idea.
I mean, you were touching on it earlier, and I commend you for it. And so, just to sort of, you know, gas you up a bit more, I think the issue of sort of raw statistics with it, and how profiling, like there's a notion sort of that like, you know, there's two really hard philosophy classes. There's metaphysics and epistemology, and they're sort of like designed to be harder, but they're like also like the weirder and the less applied philosophy, the more abstract theoretical stuff. And what the profiling paradox and, you know, trying to find a solution or a way around it really shows that, like, this way of thinking is harmful, or can wind up causing harm. And I don't know, I had complicated feelings on 181 is metaphysics, right? I had complicated feelings on metaphysics, but, you know, we it will be a different discussion meeting where it's like Daniel tells us what he thinks about metaphysics. I'm sure it will be riveting, but it is not today.
All right. Okay. The floor, of course, remains open for philosophical discussion and inquiry. I do want to move quickly onto my fourth point here in the agenda, which I just wanted to do some housekeeping, maybe solicit some feedback from members of the club about the club itself, about the way we're doing things when we're meeting and so on and so forth. Do we have, does anybody have a suggestion to submit to me as presumably the person who would, you know, make it happen, about anything the club could be doing better? Particularly, we've had questions, objections raised to when the unofficial meeting takes place. For the benefit of Rex, that is an unofficial meeting, we say, an optional meeting, because we're not ostensibly doing philosophical work in those meetings. That is to say, we're not recording, we're not having like formal presentations or directed discussions and so forth. It does not mean that we're gonna, you know, kick anybody out. We kind of can't. You could, I suppose it's possible to eject somebody from the philosophy club Canvas course, but it's an unofficial, unaffiliated club as of now. We couldn't kick you out in any meaningful sense if we wanted to.
And to be clear, we don't want to. We love you.
We don't know. Yeah, basically what we mean by, you know, the unofficial meeting is that it's not directed and formalized in the way that this one is, to the extent that this is formalized and directed. So yeah. But anyway, those are scheduled currently. Saturdays at 10 a.m. That's when I'm here hosting the meetings, because that's when I cannot be at work, not hosting meetings. But I can, if we wanted to do that at a different time, then I would be open to those suggestions. It's just it's largely a function of like what I can, you know, partly a function at least of what I can make work. But it's useless if nobody ever comes to one. So yeah.
Did anyone come to Saturday's meeting?
This last Saturday? Nope.
Were you there, William?
I was. I
am so sorry.
No, it's okay. The whole point is like you don't have to. I'm not going to levy this against anybody for any reason. It's just that it would, you know, it's a little extra time for us to get together as people interested in philosophy and just sort of shoot the shit. It's totally optional.
I would totally come to the more informal, like shoot the shit, vaguely tie it into philosophy, but really like much more informal, see where it goes meetings. I too am sorry that I didn't come, but not like I'm gonna set an alarm on Saturday to wake up at 10 a.m. Sorry. Like I'm not that. I am like a 6 out of 10 sorry if that's like the full 10. So like I don't know what your schedule is like, William, but like presumably we would have to do this either before you go to work or after you get back from work. How do we feel about switching it up to the latter of those two things?
Sorry, what the latter of I was reading the chat.
Yeah. Rather than doing it before you have work on Saturday, do it after you get back from work.
Oh, that's plausible. But it's sort of a function of how late we want to be up, because the latest I get back from work on a Saturday evening ever is going to be 10 p.m. That's the latest possible, basically, because I work at a grocery store. There's scheduling issues. Yeah, we can, you know, that if something like a 10:30 p.m. meeting is amicable to members of the club generally, that is fine with me. I'm generally still, you know, awake and active.
Likewise, and there's a understanding of philosophy that it's best done at like 3 a.m. you know, at a Waffle House anyway. Obviously we can't do the Waffle House. You know, but Rex and I's professor was just giving us this sort of spiel that there's something philosophy-y about it being done at oddball hours in the first place anyway. So I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I would certainly be far more likely to attend these meetings if they were more at night rather than in the morning. But if you know, other people, you know, prefer them in the morning and that's when we're going to start doing them, then lo and behold, I'm probably going to start setting an alarm if that's what it'll take. I'll just be grumpy for 5 minutes.
Okay. Any more feedback specifically on that point? You can always reach out to me later on for any reason. The Canvas discussion board is a good place to do it, or my CSUS email is williamwyatt@csus.edu. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, any questions or concerns, obviously throw them at me if you think of them outside the context of the meeting. Another thing I would think of, I thought of, and as Professor Carey was speaking, which seems irresponsible of me, is that one way I could sort of preserve these meetings, one way I could make these recordings available to people unobtrusively would be on YouTube. Historically, the Philosophy Club had a Gmail account, which I wound up locked out of for reasons I don't completely understand even to this day, but to do with phone numbers and Google. But I could make another one in the name of CSUS Philosophy Club, and we could post meeting recordings to YouTube, and that would be well, server space somewhere, but not server space for which we are responsible, which would be ideal. So if that's something that people would be okay with, it'd be very much putting these recordings in the public domain, but I think that's sort of worth it, just in case we hit on anything interesting.
I think that works really well. But Rex, you had a question. What is your question, Rex?
Oh yeah, I'm just wondering because I'm on the mailer list here and for the history club. I'm a double major, philosophy and history, and I haven't gone to the meeting for that at all. This is my first time here, and I'm just wondering sort of like what's the intents and purposes of these I guess you can say academic clubs, because you sort of think like you got like the tennis club or something where they all meet up and do like a round of tennis on Saturday or something. Do you kind of get what I'm asking?
For sure, yeah. So I will say as a caveat to this that a project, this particular project, and really most projects of its kind, I think are malleable. This one exactly is in its infancy, but or rather, it was resurrected. It's still getting back on its feet, and so it is still very much what we make of it. But most basically, I think this academic clubs, and this one definitely, are not so dissimilar to like sport to a tennis club, right? The objective of a tennis club most basically is to do tennis, and the objective of a philosophy club is most basically to do philosophy. And the reason for the club is because we can't really rely on philosophy to be done in the wild as much as it should. As much as I think most people majoring in philosophy would think it should, and so there's utility in having a set space for it and having a meeting place for people interested in doing the thing to get together and do the thing, irrespective of what that thing might be, as long as it's not also happening on street corners, So yeah, philosophy club is just is very much what we make of it. Currently, it has a set structure, but that is a changeable structure. And its most basic purpose is to do philosophy. If whoever is interested in philosophy is welcome to be here, regardless of whether or not they're majors in philosophy or whether they're students at CSUS. I want everybody. Philosophy is for everyone because it's everywhere. So, yeah.
And I would add on to William's point, two other things that really sort of stuck to me is you're going to get to meet professors more in an academic-y sort of club, like regardless of your major. That's part of the purpose, is to get, like we did now, like current research, what our professors are thinking and working about, and connecting and building relationships that way. And then the other thing is community. I mean, like, community involvement is like the biggest predictor of student success under normal circumstances. And it's hard to feel connected to California State University Sacramento Stingers up right now because we're all over Zoom. And so, like, part of at least my motivation is to try to sort of, build some sense of community, so we got a foundation going here as we go back to in-person classes and new philosophy majors come in, et cetera, and, building something in that way.
Yeah. All right.
I did have one other question.
Yes, go ahead.
Do we know what we're doing next week yet?
Not yet, but I'm open to suggestions. And of course, while we have our outreach coordinator here, that would, you know.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys had any suggestions for other guest speakers. If not, I could do a presentation next week.
Yeah. I know that Professor Mike Paletti was thinking about doing a presentation on some material that he cannot fit into his, I think, ancient philosophy course, or maybe modern philosophy, whichever. And that too is like is something I think is important about this club and its potential functions. I don't know about its purpose. I'm not that Aristotelian, but its intended functions. As sort of a place for professors to teach what they can't usually teach. So yeah, something maybe Professor Paletti has something he'd like to deliver to us, but that we'd probably want to give him at least 2 weeks notice. So yeah, I'd be happy to have you present, Camille, and have Professor Paletti the following week, if that's a structure we're all comfortable with. And anybody else who wants to volunteer to do a presentation, we will put that on the calendar. I want all of them.
Oh, I mean, William, I know I talked to you last week about doing cognitive dissonance on the 22nd, but if you want to push that back, you can. But I also wanted to put on the table, Daniel has already heard like 30% of my animal ethics speech before, but I wanted to throw it on the table if anyone was interested in hearing like a hedonist utilitarian argument for animal ethics, which is more in the realm of like bioethics.
Having heard it before, I already know that it is good and would just like to second that would be a good thing to put on the topic. And then I see Rex has got his hand here.
Oh yeah. I was just wondering. I guess Taylor there can help answer, since she's talking about doing this herself. But how does that work? Like you're saying the student presentations, is it someone who just you discuss something, or is it just like side research? I don't know. I literally have no clue.
Yeah, so I mean a lot of students in philosophy, we have our own interests and kind of side specialties, and so kind of as fillers in between professor presentations, we'll kind of give talks on things that interest us. And so like for me, I'm currently writing my thesis paper for my graduate application, which is on animal ethics. It's very similar to Peter Singer's. So that's kind of something that my specialty is in. I'm really invested in bioethics. So if there's something that you're interested in philosophy, you want to kind of do, that's something that you might want to bring up.
Yeah, and usually we have students present, and then afterwards we kind of have we give feedback on their presentation, and then we discuss.
Like I said, mine would probably be like a spoiler or kind of a just review for Daniel, because he's heard about 30% of it off and on, but.
So have I, but I don't mind. I mean, like, I know you talked a lot about animal ethics and being a vegan back when we had I forgot what it was, recent ethical theory.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I actually enjoyed it. But speaking of presentations, did you actually want to present next meeting, Taylor?
Well, I was talking to William last week after our meeting, and we were talking about cognitive dissonance, and I brought up the fact that I could talk about it because I do have some specialty in writing about it. But I know that I could either kind of talk about either something like along the lines of cognitive dissonance or animal ethics, and I would just kind of at this point let you guys decide, because I don't want to do something that people aren't interested in or aren't too familiar with. But I can either go next week, or Camille, if you want to go next week, I can go at a later date as well. It's not too much of an issue for me.
Oh, yeah, you can go next week. I was just, yeah, I don't think I was able to stay the entire meeting last week, so I had no idea that you were planning to do next week. But you can totally present next week. I was just offering just because I assumed that we had nothing to do next week.
So I've written on both cognitive dissonance and logical consistency and animal ethics from a hedonist utilitarian standpoint. So it's kind of up to you guys, since we are nearing the end of the semester, whichever one sounds more interesting.
I would say I want to hear both presentations. Only because I want to have those ideas in the public sphere if we can get them there. But the question of which one should come first, I'm going to say we should probably go with animal ethics first, only because that's the slightly simpler one. I imagine. The case is somewhat easier to make. There's a little bit more evidence that would be available to the layperson that you could build off of, and so on and so forth. It's slightly the easier case to make. So I'm thinking that might be the strategic one to go first.
Okay.
If that is your preference, obviously I'm not gonna dictate that. I'm also gonna go ahead and make a note that we will have Taylor presenting on the April 22nd. Ideally, alternate that, Professor Paletti presenting on what would be the 29th, and then maybe Camille presenting on the 6th. Do we want to run into May? I think we can afford May 6th, right? That's not the end of the semester yet. Okay. Just check. Always worth checking.
This week is the middle of May.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Awesome. Yeah, we don't. Let's agree right now not to do anything finals week, or we're all going to be. I'm going to be dead for like 3 weeks. Coming in, before and after finals week. But yeah, lovely. Just real quick, I don't want to have this go over an hour and a half for the recording purposes, but we'll stay on after it happens. After it ends. And so, do we have any more questions or comments we want to raise in the context of a recorded meeting before it's over? Okay.
How far away are the stars?
I'm going to say at least 100 feet. Okay. I suppose that's it for this meeting of Philosophy Club officially. Thank you to everybody who was here, including those who haven't stayed the entire time till now. I don't know who we lost a moment ago, but the pictures changed. Anyway, for some reason I can't figure it out. The next meeting will be on the 22nd. Officially, there is the unofficial, optional, non-substantive meeting this Saturday, the 17th. If we want to, I may announce a change to that, but those of you in the Canvas course will have that notification. And yeah, again, thanks to everybody who's here. Special thanks to Professor Brandon Carey again, and we will see everybody again next time. Thank you.